Susan Nikirk is a Messianic Jew born in New York City to a Jewish mom who escaped from Germany at the beginning of World War II. Though raised in Judaism, Susan longed to know God beyond her traditions, and today she's an ordained minister and co-founder of Nikirk Ministries. One of Susan's core messages is the importance of the church understanding its Jewish roots, and her life and testimony are a living witness to Jesus' words that nothing is impossible to those who believe. And Susan, great to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and I do have to say it's Nikirk Ministries.
Nikirk.
That's okay.
Okay.
The word Nikirk actually means new church. It's from Germany, a word called Neukirch. So it's mispronounced many times, so that's okay.
Tell us a little bit about your story. Especially, I found it fascinating. Your mom made it out of Germany at the beginning of the Holocaust.
Well, basically, not just my mother. What happened, to make it brief, is her brother, who's still alive. I have one uncle who's still alive. He will be 99. When he was 16, he left Germany, and had he not left, the family would not have gotten out. And because he left, came to the United States, he actually served in the Army here. Through that, he was able to get my mother and my aunt and my grandparents out. Of course, they came out with just $10 and what they had, and it was already the beginning of the war. Some of my other family did die over there, and I'm firstborn here in America.
Wow.
So it was a miracle story, and my story is a miracle as it goes on. I have so many miracles.
Growing up in the traditions of Judaism, I'd read that there was kind of a time when since your family came to America, they kind of maybe left some of the traditions behind and some of those connections and roots behind. Yeah,
well, basically, my family I was from a lineage of rabbis, and one of the most famous was Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. And if you're watching and you're Jewish, I can tell you that you stay Jewish. You just received Yeshua. His name is Yeshua. Jesus is his name we give him, but Yeshua is his Hebrew name, and you just receive him as the Messiah. You become completed. You don't leave Judaism, and that was an issue for me in the beginning when I came to the Lord in 1986. And I came from this lineage of rabbis. He's no longer alive. He wrote about 1,000 songs. They used to call him the dancing rabbi, and that's probably why I became a dancer too, which we're probably going to get into. And they did leave it, and what happened is they just did the traditions, but in my heart, I still had a longing to know God. I only knew God through tradition, which is how we have that in many religions right now.
So how did you come to know Jesus as your Messiah?
Well, basically, there's a story about me called Dancing Out of Darkness, which is on a DVD that I guess you're going to offer if people want to get it. And I was born and raised in New York, and I started dancing at the age of 3. Dance became my life. I became dance, dance became me. And then I also wound up, believe it or not, and kept my dancing career began to boom and move, and I studied, and I toured with the Beatles in the 1960s. And on my DVD, which is Dancing Out of Darkness, you actually have the Beatles. I toured with them, and I danced with them in Shea Stadium. There they are in Shea Stadium. And got to know them personally, and worked with them on a 3-week tour. We were the opening act. There we are there. If you can guess which one I am, I won't tell you.
Wow, look at you. Go.
I won't tell you which one it is. It's a second one from on the left, all right? Anyway, toured with the Beatles, and that began my life career in dance, really, as far as it being booming. Then I was on Broadway, and then eventually I became a champion, also ballroom dancer. I was 3rd in the world as a theatrical ballroom dancer. And my life was in kind of a turmoil at that time. My mother got cancer. She was living in Florida. My dad died when I was very young. I was 9. And so I always had a void. I had fear. I had rejection. There were things in my life that I didn't understand. I felt like, okay, God, where are you? Are you here? I mean, I only knew God in a religious way. And some of you watching it may be the same for you. And I wanted to know him. I needed him. My father was not there. And then when my mother got ill with cancer, I was also going through a very serious divorce at that time. And I was traveling back and forth to Florida, where she lived, and to New York, trying to keep my career together, trying to help my mom. And eventually the career dissolved and my marriage dissolved. And then 2 years of my mother's cancer, during that time, I met a woman in the dance business who was a born-again Christian. Now, I'm Jewish. New York.
Yeah.
Never heard of that in my life.
Yeah.
Now, you think people have heard of that in New York, but they don't. I only thought there was Catholics and Jews.
Right. That's it.
Nothing else.
And some Muslims, too. Don't forget the Muslims.
Well, I didn't know back then, though, you know. So anyway, she was a born-again Christian, and she began to put me on a prayer list in a huge church, and one thing led to the other, and I found myself traveling and looking into the Bible. And I thought, now, why am I looking into the Bible? I mean, something is not right here. And I also did not know that she was witnessing to my mother at the same time.
Wow.
And my mother always believed in God, had a close relationship with God. She was not afraid to die. It was a very difficult time for me watching this. And my mother said, Susan, God has a plan for you, and you don't have to be afraid. And she said, I'm not afraid to die. And if you do your part, God will do his part.
Wow.
So at that point, it was very close to my mother's death. And the day my mother died, they say for a Jewish person to come to know Yeshua, Jesus, that you need actually a vision or some kind of a miracle happening in your life. And on that day, it was pouring rain. She went into a coma. She lived in a very small apartment in Miami Beach, and it was right by the water. And I'll never forget as long as I live. At the moment she died, I was holding her hand. It was pitch black outside, and I had a Jewish nurse that was helping me. It was one room, and a light opened up in the sky. And the rain stopped, and this light beamed down onto my mother's face. And I couldn't speak, and I went out onto the terrace, and on her terrace there, and I looked up, and so did my nurse that I was with, and I said, something is happening here.
Wow.
And 2 days later, I went to my first church service. I'd never been to a church, and my friend took me, and I heard that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And I said, but I'm Jewish. You know, we're taught, you don't believe in Jesus. I mean, people don't understand that when you come from many, you know, out of the people from the Holocaust, or if they've never studied history, I mean, you have to understand that even during that time, Hitler professed to be a Christian.
Right.
And even there were times, my aunt had told me during Kristallnacht, this was a certain time in Germany, they took the Jews and put them in the synagogues, and they burned the synagogue, and they used to sing Christ We Adore Thee outside. So I was taught, you just don't do that. I mean, it's like you're leaving
Anathema,
your faith, you're leaving everything.
Right.
And so I began to study, and I began to research, and so I began to look. I said, okay, I want to know, God, are you real? Is he the Messiah? And I began to study. It took months. I looked at the Old Testament. I looked at the New Testament. I did both. And I realized that there was all these hundreds of prophecies that he would come to his own wouldn't receive him, that he's Jewish.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't realize Jesus is Jewish. He's Jewish, you know. I mean, this is a Jewish book.
Yeah.
This is not a book of another religion. And so the day I realized that, I just asked him into my heart, and my life changed 180 degrees.
Wow. Really amazing story of how God kind of brought you to a place of knowing Jesus as Messiah.
Right.
Not having to abandon your heritage at all, because you know Jesus is Jewish.
Well, in the beginning, I have to tell you, and please don't take offense to what I'm going to say, I kind of got Christianized. Because what happens is, a lot of the church doesn't understand that a Jew does not convert. And so basically, I went into a whole other direction for a season of my life. And I've had to now go into a whole other direction, coming back to my Jewish roots.
Yeah, and one of the things that you really bring out to the body of Christ is the fact that as the church, we have to understand our Jewish roots and have to kind of connect the dots and see that, okay, you know, God didn't become a Christian. You know, Jesus was Jewish, and then we get grafted into that living vine.
That's right. That's right. And he never said make a religion. He said make disciples. And that's one of the things I think that we need to understand too. And he observed all of the holidays. If you study Leviticus 23, I mean, that does not say these are the Jewish feasts. It says these are the feasts of the Lord. And if we know the Lord, then we want to understand them. And, you know, it becomes a blessing for Christians to understand those 7 feasts and to really begin to go into them. And you know, we talked before the gentleman was on about the birth of the Lord. And really, he was born during the fall feasts. We don't have an exact date. But if you search it out, it was during a harvest season. So we don't know if it was during, you know, from the time of Rosh Hashanah to the Feast of Tabernacles, but that's actually when all that really happened. But it's fine to observe Christmas if you observe it because you're observing it because you love the Lord.
Right, absolutely. So, Susan, how did God take you from a young girl dancing with the Beatles to having really a worldwide ministry and impacting so many lives around the world?
Well, I met my husband in church. I was going to actually a church, Grace Church of Kendall in South Florida. The picture you see there is our remarriage. We got remarried in our own synagogue that we bought years later. And my husband dedicated his life as a Ruth. And the book of Ruth is really a prophetic revelation for the end time, how Ruth, who was a Gentile, attached herself to Naomi, who was a Jew. And they are showing a picture of our adopted daughter, which we're probably going to get into at some point. That's an amazing story in itself, especially at my age. And I met my husband in the church that I was in, and I had a ministry back then that was called the Creative Arts Ministry. And it was all about dance and sign language, and I did a lot of productions, large productions in the church. And I never thought I'd get married again. He never thought he'd get married again. He was comes from a heritage of preachers himself. And God just supernaturally, divinely brought us together. We never dated. That's a story. That's a whole other story. And through that, we moved to New England to go to Bible college and help some pastors pioneer some works up there. We thought we would be in New England for a few years. Finished Bible college for 2 years. And then our ministry, what happened really is my video, the DVD, it's now a DVD, Dancing Out of Darkness, which is on our website, which has the Beatles on it, was sent over to Europe, to Holland, to the nation of the Netherlands, into a huge, huge conference. And they were looking for a woman conference speaker. And nobody knew me. And God opened the door, and I became a woman, the big woman conference speaker. I was with Mars Cirillo and all these different people, and there's who's Susan Nikirk, you know.
Yeah.
And there it started. Our ministry started actually overseas, and then we traveled for 10 years into Holland was our main nation. We even have a Dutch store on our website, and then Belgium, Switzerland, even Iceland, and Germany, and did a lot of traveling for over 10 years. And then we pioneered a one new man congregation, bought a synagogue, which we have now sold.
Right. And one new man being?
The Jew and the Gentile becoming one
new
in the Messiah, which is really what my husband and I depict together.
Right, there you go.
Yeah.
In living color.
We became in living color.
Yeah. Susan, real quick, we've got about a minute, but God touched your life powerfully through physical healing as well.
Well, about 6 years ago, I was almost dead. That's an incredible story in itself. Nobody knew it was wrong. I went to over 40 doctors. It was like the woman with the issue of blood. It tested my faith incredibly. I heard one word from the Lord during that whole time, and it was, Satan is trying to sift you as wheat, but I'm praying for you that your faith fail not. And it was, I couldn't walk. I wound up in a wheelchair, here being a dancer, dancing for the Lord, couldn't walk. I thought this was the end of my life. Our ministry went to kind of a halt for a season, and we sold our building eventually and closed the congregation. And then supernaturally, through a lot of prayer and through meeting an incredible Christian doctor, Dr. William Lee Cowden, and even Dr. Colbert helped me in the beginning, who a lot of people know. It was discovered that I had post-Lyme autoimmune disease. That I could do a whole show about in itself, because 50% of the population has it, they don't know it. But God touched me, healed me, and I'm even dancing again and restored my life. And I believe that God can restore your life and touch you even right now as you're listening to me, because nothing is impossible with Him.